The Atacama Desert stretches across northern Chile with a restraint that feels deliberate. Rain rarely interrupts its surface. The ground holds its shape for years at a time, marked by mineral veins and pale dust rather than vegetation. Towns appear where work requires them, not where land invites settlement. Roads cross long distances without deviation. The air is dry enough to preserve what would decay elsewhere. Sound carries far, but little moves. Beneath this surface, the desert has been mined for more than a century. Copper, gold, and other minerals formed the economic backbone of the region long before modern safety standards existed. Shafts were cut into hillsides and sunk vertically into rock, often expanded over decades without a unified plan. Some mines changed ownership repeatedly. Others continued operating with minimal structural updates, relying on familiarity rather than redesign. In early August 2010, the San Jose mine was one of many such operations scattered near the city of Copiapó. It had been active since the late 19th century, closing and reopening multiple times after financial or safety setbacks. The mine descended more than 700 meters underground, accessed by a long spiral ramp rather than a straight vertical shaft. This design allowed vehicles to move or to the surface but also created a single primary route for entry and exit. On the morning of August 5, 33 men reported for work. They ranged in age from early 20s to late 50s. Most were Chilean. A few had worked in mining for decades, others for only a few years. Some specialized in machinery, others in drilling or blasting. Their experience varied, but all were familiar with the environment underground. They carried lunches, tools, and water intended for a standard shift. Mining in the Atacama followed a routine shaped by heat and depth. Work was scheduled to avoid the most extreme surface temperatures. Underground, conditions were more stable but still harsh. Dust accumulated quickly. Air circulation depended on fans and ventilation shafts. Communication with the surface was limited to radios and scheduled check-ins. The San Jose mine had a record of instability. Previous collapses had occurred, some fatal. Inspectors had raised concerns over rock falls and insufficient reinforcement. Despite this, production continued. For the men working that day, these facts were part of the background rather than the foreground. The mine was imperfect, but it was familiar. Routine has a way of dulling risk. At approximately 2 p.m., the shift was underway deep inside the mine. Some workers were near the bottom level, others partway up the access ramp. There was no warning sound distinct enough to signal what was coming. When the collapse occurred, it did not resemble a single event. Rock fell in stages. Dust filled the tunnels. The access ramp was blocked by debris estimated to weigh hundreds of thousands of tons. The men gathered instinctively, moving toward a known emergency refuge near the lowest level of the mine. The shelter was designed to provide temporary safety during short disruptions. It contained limited food, water, and oxygen support. It was not built for extended isolation. Above ground, the mine fell silent. Initial assessments suggested that survival was unlikely. The collapse had sealed the only viable exit. Communication lines were severed. For days, drilling equipment searched for signs of life without success. Time passed in measured intervals, marked more by procedure than expectation. Below ground, the men accounted for one another. They rationed what supplies they had. The temperature hovered around 30 degrees Celsius. Humidity increased. Darkness became constant once batteries were conserved. They organized themselves without formal instruction, relying on habits formed through years of labor and cooperation. The days that followed were not defined by panic. They were defined by adjustment. Food was divided into strict portions. A single can of tuna was split into multiple servings. Milk was shared by spoonfuls. Each man received a bite, not a meal. Watches were synchronized to maintain a sense of time, even when daylight no longer existed. As hours turned into days, uncertainty became the dominant condition. There was no confirmation that anyone knew they were alive. Drilling noises, when they occurred, were distant and inconsistent. The men documented their situation carefully, writing notes and tracking supplies. Order became a tool as important as food. By the 17th day underground, a drill bit finally broke through the rock near the shelter. Attached to it was a note written in red ink. It stated, simply, that the 33 men were alive and sheltering underground. The message traveled upward, carried by machinery rather than voice. From that moment, the situation changed, though isolation did not end. Rescue would take time. Weeks would pass before any extraction was possible. Below ground, survival shifted from endurance without contact to endurance with expectation. The men remained where they were, adjusting again to a new phase defined by waiting, discipline, and a slow extension of support from above. With confirmation of life came coordination, not relief. Contact between the surface and the refuge was established through narrow boreholes drilled with precision rather than speed. These openings were never intended for movement, only for exchange. Through them passed air, water, food, medicine, and written messages. Nothing arrived quickly. Everything was lowered carefully, measured against the depth and instability of the rock. Nutrition became a calculated process. Specialists on the surface designed diets for 33 adult men expected to remain inactive for an extended period in high heat and humidity. Calories were reduced deliberately to prevent digestive strain. Protein, salt, and electrolytes were prioritized. Food arrived in sealed packages, lowered slowly through tubes. Below ground, the men maintained the same system they had already created. Rations were divided evenly. No adjustments were made based on seniority or strength. Water distribution followed similar discipline. Hydration was controlled. Physical activity was limited to reduce fluid loss. Clothing remained damp. Sweat did not evaporate. Skin irritation and fungal infections became common. These were documented and treated remotely through instructions sent from above. Medical oversight expanded. Doctors assessed weight loss, circulation, sleep patterns, and signs of anxiety. Some men struggled with insomnia. Others experienced disorientation despite strict timekeeping. Mental strain was addressed through routine rather than reassurance. The men were encouraged to maintain schedules, assign responsibilities, and avoid unnecessary discussion of outcomes. Above ground, the rescue site grew into a controlled operation. Engineers evaluated drilling strategies simultaneously. 3 separate plans were launched to reduce dependence on a single outcome. Each shaft faced resistance from dense rock and unstable layers. Equipment failures occurred regularly. Progress was slow, recorded in small daily increments. The environment underground remained unchanged. Temperature hovered near 30 degrees Celsius. Humidity stayed high. Air circulation improved slightly with additional ventilation, but conditions remained oppressive. The mine offered no variation. There was no visual cue to mark passing time. Days merged into longer intervals. As weeks passed, awareness of duration reshaped behavior. Survival was no longer reactive. It became procedural. Silence increased. Movements became economical. Conflict was avoided deliberately. Cooperation was no longer instinctive alone, it was maintained consciously. Eventually, one drilling plan advanced more consistently than the others. Engineers designated it as the primary rescue shaft. Its diameter was calculated precisely to allow a single extraction capsule to pass. There was no allowance for error. Any deviation risked collapse. Below ground, preparation began without certainty. Physical conditioning exercises were introduced to limit muscle deterioration. Diets were adjusted again. Medical evaluations were conducted to determine extraction order. Decisions were based on health, psychological stability, and logistics rather than preference. The capsule design was finalized above ground. It was narrow, reinforced, and untested in practice. Engineers simulated conditions repeatedly. Each descent and ascent would take time. Extraction would occur one man at a time. On October 13, 2010, 69 days after the collapse, the first miner was prepared for ascent. Below ground, there was no celebration. Procedures were followed carefully. Equipment was checked. Instructions were repeated. The capsule descended slowly through the shaft. When the first man reached the surface, confirmation passed downward not through emotion, but through process. Extraction continued. Each ascent took nearly an hour. The order was maintained. Medical checks occurred immediately upon arrival. Below ground, those remaining waited in the same space they had occupied for more than 2 months. The environment did not change. The routine held until the last man entered the capsule. The final extraction occurred without ceremony. The shelter was left empty. The mine remained sealed behind them. In the weeks that followed, investigations examined structural failures, oversight lapses, and regulatory shortcomings. The mine was closed permanently. The men returned to the surface world altered by confinement, discipline, and duration rather than by spectacle. The incident entered historical record not because of the collapse alone, but because of what followed. Survival was not achieved through improvisation or heroism. It was sustained through routine, cooperation, and restraint under prolonged isolation. The Atacama Desert remained unchanged above. Below it, the mine stayed silent. The survival had ended, but the conditions that produced it remained part of the landscape.